Hi, I'm Victor, the main organizer of the Full Stack Flutter conference. On this channel we publish the best talks from the conference every week throughout the year, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. I'm also the founder of ServerPod, so if you want to build your backend in Dart, make sure to check that out too. Masahiro Aoki is the developer behind OpenCI, an open source CI/CD service for Flutter. He will talk about building GitHub Apps with Dart. Let's dive in!
Building GitHub Apps with Dart, a pathless tutorial. Hi, I'm Masahiro Aoki, founder of OpenCI, free CI/CD service for Flutter. And if you have interested, you can go to the openci.io. And I was a former software engineer at IBM, startup co-founder, CTO, and the organizer of Flutter Tokyo. If you have chances to come to Japan, let's do some Flutter meetups. Of course, I have loved Flutter and Dart for 5 years. Today's goal is to understand what GitHub Apps is, why GitHub Apps are important, and how to develop GitHub Apps with Dart. Before deep dive into the contents, let's talk about what GitHub Apps are. GitHub Apps use the GitHub API to provide some functionality to your repositories. I think it's difficult to understand what GitHub Apps are, so I will give you some examples. You may heard of GitHub apps called Renovate. This app, for example, in the case of Flutter, checks pubspec.yaml regularly and prompts us to update outdated packages. More specifically, for example, it runs every Fridays and creates a PR. For Flutter repositories, these are GitHub apps. The first prerequisite labeler is GitHub Actions, but everything else is GitHub Apps. I summarized major differences between GitHub Apps and GitHub Actions. Using GitHub Apps is very simple, just install what you want. On the other hand, when using GitHub Actions, you have to write YAML file for each repository when using GitHub Actions. In addition, GitHub Apps are hosted by the service providers. Therefore, users do not have to worry about the server cost. Of course, there are paid GitHub apps. On the other hand, GitHub Actions are hosted by GitHub. To use Actions, you need to use Runner, which is virtual machines. If you use Actions a lot, you have to pay the cost. For the development, you can use JavaScript or TypeScript or Docker for GitHub Actions. For the GitHub Apps, you can choose any programming languages as long as the language handles GitHub REST API. But the most popular framework is Probot, which is Node.js framework and the OSS. Of course, it's possible to use Dart for develop GitHub apps. But as far as I can tell, there are very little people to do that. I think it is because Probot is very useful and easy to create GitHub apps. As mentioned earlier, Probot is, in my opinion, the most popular. However, I wanted to use Dart for developing GitHub apps. I'll explain why. I am developing OpenCI, which is OSS CI/CD service for Flutter developers, and most of the code are written in Dart. Why did I choose Dart? Because I want OpenCI is open to every Flutter developers. If OpenCI is written in Dart, more developers can understand and use OpenCI. Of course, some developers can understand other languages, but I believe using Dart is the best option for OpenCI and users. However, I have used Probot, which is Node.js framework for getting build job from GitHub repositories, because Probot is very useful, but this is unacceptable, so I consider switching to Dart. Also, I personally prefer Dart to TypeScript. In OpenCI, when pull request is created, our GitHub app gets GitHub webhook payload, process the data, and writes build job to the Firestore. We use Dart Firebase admin for writing data to the Firestore. By the way, before Invertase released Dart Firebase admin, we had to use Google APIs package, which is auto-generated REST API clients for Google APIs. It took a lot of time to use Firestore by using Google APIs because we had to check Google API's documents. So thank you, Invertase and contributors. And then I will explain why I chose GitHub App instead of GitHub Actions. I think with this explanation, your understanding of GitHub Apps will be deeper. GitHub Actions requires you to write YAML file for each repository. OpenCI is CI/CD service. I think it's a bit inconvenient to ask users to write YAML file for every repository to use OpenCI. Also, when the logic of getting build job from GitHub has been changed, it is necessary to edit every YAML file for users. Besides, to run GitHub Actions, you need runner or machines, virtual machines. In most cases, you use GitHub hosted runner, so users may have to pay the cost. On the other hand, for GitHub Apps, you only need to install the app. Users don't need to write or manage YAML file. Since the app runs in OpenCI environment, users don't have to pay for the machine cost. These are the reasons why we chose GitHub Apps over GitHub Actions. Finally, I will explain how to develop GitHub Apps in Dart. To understand how to develop GitHub Apps in Dart, it's essential to write code. So this time, we will create a GitHub app called Code Sensei, which is automatic code review bot, similar to the Code Rabbit. By the way, the word sensei in Japanese means teachers, so this is called teacher. First, I explain overall architecture. When the PR is opened, the Code Sensei receives GitHub webhook payload. This payload contains code differences, and the app sends them to the Gemini. Gemini returns the result to the bot, and it creates review comment to pull request. Before writing code, let's select backend framework. The major options are Shelf, which is developed by Dart.gm, Cyberport, and Dartfrog. For the Cyberport, the organizer of full stack Flutter develops it. For Dartfrog, very good benchers does. As for customizability, Shelf is very high. Cyberport has database and OS. So if you develop full stack app, Cyberport is for you. Dartfrog's functionality is minimum or simple. Code Sensei only needs to interact with GitHub REST API, so let's use Dartfrog. Also, Dartfrog has hard reload like Flutter, so if you make changes of the code, you don't have to restart dev server. The next step is where to deploy GitHub Apps. Globe is developed by Invertase. It is now in public preview and free. So this is a very fascinating option for us. On the other hand, Google Cloud Run is pay-as-you-go, but it's very stable. At first, I thought about adopting Globe, but when I tried it, it took a very long time to load each pages, especially log pages. So let's use Cloud Run. That log produces Docker file, so it can be deployed. So if it can be deployed, you can use any cloud services like AWS, Azure, or DigitalOcean, and any services that you want to deploy. And let's create a new project with Datafrog. To do so, install Datafrog CLI. After that, using Datafrog create command, you create a new Dart project. To run dev server, run Datafrog dev. These are the dependencies, except Datafrog, .json web token, which is used for GitHub OS, freeze for creating model class. GitHub is for utilizing GitHub REST API easier. Google Generative AI is official package from Google. It is necessary to use Gemini. Before writing Code Sensei, you must register Code Sensei with GitHub. By registering the bot, the app can receive GitHub event. Also, this variable is a little bit complicated, but be sure to allow prerequisite permission. If you don't, no event will be sent to the Code Sensei even if you open PR. And unfortunately, you won't get any errors from GitHub. Another thing you need to prepare before writing code is debugging environment. Of course, you can deploy GitHub Apps for Cloud Run and check using the Cloud Logging, but deploying the bot to the Cloud Run takes some minutes, like 1 to 3 minutes, so it's inconvenient for debugging. Therefore, to debug the app in local environment, let's use nglock. Don't worry, it's free. By using nglock, your local GitHub apps can receive GitHub webhook payload. After creating a new project with running Datafrog create, index.dart file is generated. There is one request function. Please think of it as a kind of main function for the Flutter or Dart project. If the domain is called sensei.io, send get request, this function will be triggered or called. If you want to create new road, please create next.dart. Since code sensei is simple GitHub app, I will use GitHub index.dart. Next, let's load environment variable. PEM and GitHub app ID are retrieved when registering GitHub apps with GitHub. Also, this implementation is for local development. Therefore, if you use Cloud Run, you need to register your environment variables to Google Cloud Run and add another implementation to read the variables in the cloud. I didn't use Globe this time, as mentioned earlier, but Globe can handle local and cloud environmental variables without adding another code. GitHub sends webhook payload to Code Sensei according to the permission we set at GitHub. This code converts payload to JSON or map type in Dart. Actually, there's a problem. If you use Probot with TypeScript, it converts this JSON to GitHub object. I wish I could do the same with GitHub package, but as far as I could investigate it, it's impossible. So I will continue with map type. GitHub package is very useful and popular, but I think it lacks comprehensive and friendly documentation. So if anyone knows a good way to do this, please let me know. To use GitHub API from Code Sensei with installation ID, PEM, and GitHub App ID, it generates access token and authorizes the app with the token. You can now use GitHub API from the bot. More specifically, you can create review comment on PRs. Let's take action and pull request data from the GitHub payload JSON. Action tells us what action has been taken at the GitHub. In this code, when the PR is open, the code sensei sends review request to Gemini. So this is how it is implemented. So you can also get actions on various other events, such as when the issue is open, PR is closed, PR changed to draft, or something like that. While very convenient, the learning cost of the GitHub API are very high because there is so much thing that can be done with GitHub REST APIs. Let's send code differences from the JSON to Gemini for the code review. It is very easy to use Gemini in Dart since there is an official Dart package for Gemini called Google Generative AI by the Google. Simply specify Gemini model, API key, and the prompt, and call the generate content method. In this time, I chose to use Gemini Flash because it's very reasonable pricing and fast response. Of course, you can use other models like Gemini Pro and GPT from OpenAI. By the way, the cost of the one review was around 1 cent. It's very, very cheap. And it was 10 times cheaper than the latest GPT model when I checked. Use Gemini response and create review comment, and you are all done. Our review comment should be added for the relevant pull request as follows. So in summary, you can develop GitHub apps with Dart. Source code is this. It's open source. And if you have any questions, please feel to reach me at mfreud, X, or Masahiro Aoki of LinkedIn. Thank you so much.